and welcome to Comically Pedantic, where we take a detailed look at the complicated concepts, characters, and history of comic book culture. I'm your host, Jackal Chase, and joining me on this episode, as always, is the wonderful Corinne Levy.
Hi!
Yeah, so that makes a lot more sense for if I keep the messed up intro in.
It doesn't have to make sense. When does anything I ever do make sense?
For those joining us, we've been talking for over a half an hour. We have started recording and immediately screwed up.
I cooked it. Derek was fine. I was the one that cooked it.
It's a good time. We're having a good time. So I guess we should start with, what's your bright spot for the week?
Oh gosh. What is it? I don't know. It's been a wild week. Oh, I know my bright spot. Okay, I got to have some super delicious sancocho with some of my wonderful coworkers on one of my last days of working because I'm moving. So, I unfortunately had to leave my job so that I could go to a different state. But yeah, we got to have sancocho, and it's like this super awesome Puerto Rican stew. It's so good. I love it so much. And we all just got to sit together and eat. And we were like, ugh, what a time. So good. I still have some of it, and I'm so excited to have yummy leftovers. And then I got to see some family. I just had to have a nice glass of wine. I can't complain. I'm hanging in there. I'm doing fine. I'm alive. I'm awake. I'm alert. I'm enthusiastic. We're killing it. What is your bright spot?
That's a good question. I was actually trying to think of it. So I guess for me, I'm going to go with my dog. Because he's being a huge asshole right now, and I'm going to make him feel bad.
We're going to guilt trip him.
That's right.
Yeah, never cool.
No, I don't know. I've been reading a lot of fun stuff and just having a good time with I'm branching out into different things. I mean, not incredibly out of nowhere stuff, things that I'm interested in, but picking up in different areas. I just started watching Letterkenny, which I think is really funny. With Letterkenny, one of the things that I think is really fun, I love that you have to kind of follow along from the beginning in order to really get a lot of the humor, because it just builds off of mimetic language.
Right.
So I watched an episode with Austin, and at the end, Austin was asking me some questions why did this person do this? What did they why is this the thing that they said? And I was like, it really just builds off of things that they are encapsulating an entire feeling in a dumb catchphrase kind of.
Right.
But it works. I'm also really happy that early on in that show, there's a lot of bathroom humor that I was not super into, and they have moved away from that, and I'm so happy for that.
Yeah, you're not a bathroom humor kind of fan, which I've learned.
There's an entire episode where they make a Facebook clone called Fartbook, and I hated every minute of it.
Oh.
The funny aspect of it was seeing the characters react to things, but the bathroom jokes were god awful.
Gotcha. It grew. That's okay.
So I guess just expanding out into new things. I watch a lot of YouTube. I spend a lot of time reading and researching stuff. So it's rare that I find something new that I get really excited about.
Okay. That's
So
fair.
This is kind of, I guess that'll be my bright spot.
There you go. Dog and Ken.
For anyone that is new to joining us, I feel like we should actually at the beginning of the show maybe mention what the fuck we do.
Oh, yeah, we read Spider-Man. Just a lot of Spider-Man right now.
we do a lot of like in-depth dives into stuff, and usually if I'm doing a deep research topic, Corinne knows almost
The
nothing about
bare minimum.
it.
I know the title of what it's gonna be, and then I don't have to do anything but listen, and it's a nice break for me.
This research we've decided to take on together, and we're going through the Clone Saga piece by piece.
Mhm.
I believe this is the 7th episode that we're doing on the Clone Saga, where you and I alternate back and forth reading, and boy, is this getting a little difficult.
Yeah, it's a time right now. We just had like Dr. Octopus get killed by this guy named Kane, who's just like a blue man who might have like matching DNA or something to Peter Parker and also Ben Riley. Ben Riley is like Peter Parker's clone. What a time. But yeah, Kane keeps killing off a bunch of like villains, and then both spider people are like, whoa, punch! And then that's pretty much what's been going on. No one really knows any connections yet. Like, we haven't seen Ben Riley or Peter Parker next to each other properly since like the first episode, I think. Like the
Yeah.
first section of reading. They are both aware that like each other still exists, but like they don't really do anything about it.
So that is one of those things that I have actually been a little confused by, and we're going to get a little bit into it in
Okay.
this episode. Because at the end of the first one, Ben, as far as Peter knows, Ben died because he like jumped into an exploding car, and then Peter never saw him after that. And
Yeah.
that's like where they leave off. And then but then Ben has been like parading around town
Yeah, he was
as
staying in like a natural history museum for a minute. Now he like lives in a hotel, but like the hotel is treated like an apartment.
it's
And
very
it's weird.
confusing, like Ben's uh like how much
Ben's
Peter knows of
timeline
Ben.
is
Yeah.
weird also. I
Oh
thought
yeah.
that's what you were, but Ben's timeline is weird because you have like the exploding car. We don't really know where Ben was in between the car accident and like the first section that I read was called The Exile Returns. And there was only one point towards like the end of that little story section where it sounded like he was going to leave, but then he ended up not leaving because he had a big battle with like Venom. But now it sounds like he was gone for a period of time because he had met like this guy named Dr. Seward who had done tests on him and taught him a little bit about himself. But apparently that might have been in between the exploding car or before the exploding car.
I believe that is before. I believe so. He meets Dr. Seward Trainer in the 5 years from when he disappeared after the original Clone Saga and before this Clone Saga.
The other confusing thing though is when you add Kane into it, because Kane has we're about, like we said, this is episode 7. So that's at least like, I don't know, 7 times 4 is 28. Math. That's at least like 28 issues that we've read. And this guy Kane is still been given like no context as to like truly where he came from. We still know like nothing of an origin story. The only thing we know is that he can kill people by like doing the whole Mark of Cain thing. And he knows that Mary Jane's gonna get murdered. And he's been killing the main villains that have been alongside him.
So we've had a lot of different things happen with Peter and Ben, and a lot of things have happened in their lives. It's been very confusing. Both have been getting weird visions. Both have been haunted by Kane, even though we don't know why. And both have had villains killed off by Kane. And that's what led us to the funeral for an octopus, where we spent most of the miniseries not really dealing with Doc Ock's death in any way other than having a bunch of bad guys try to steal his stuff.
Because if I'm remembering right, like Kane or Dr. Octopus was the first one of like Spider-Man's one-on-one interactions recently that Kane had killed off. Because as far as I remember, so like we got Grim Hunter, Kane killed, and that was in one of the very Ben Riley heavy things. And then Electro almost. And then Mysterio was an almost, but it was Robot. And that was again another like, oh, well, I guess that was maybe both of them. That Spider-Man and Scarlet. They're starting, okay, Scarlet Spider and Spider-Man are starting to come closer together again, but they still haven't properly like reintroduced themselves to each other. And it wasn't until I guess Funeral of an Octopus, now that I'm realizing, when they really were like the closest they've ever been in terms of like character interactions.
Yeah, and I think even during that, it's mostly just seeing each other sort of like they're in the same place
They're
at different
always like
times.
5 minutes behind or ahead of each other.
Leading out of Funeral for a Friend, we still have Peter now reunited with Mary Jane, finding out he's going to be a dad, and deciding that it's important that he actually have a real life to live. Because before that, he was doing the whole I'm just the spider emo bullshit. And sort of along those lines, Ben is in the same boat. He's starting to realize that he kind of likes having a life separate from Peter and he can have friends, even though he gets a little over melodramatic and sort of tries to push them away after getting to know them. It's really weird. I don't know what's going on with like where Ben's head is. I can understand being upset, but
With Ben, from what I've read so far, it's very much like he doesn't want to get in Peter Parker's way of his life. And he wants to just like do his own thing. But a lot of times he steps up because of the memories that he shares. So he's like, I may not like want to have a relationship with these people or like, but there is a weight to them that I already have preconceived almost.
right.
So
And
he's just very lost also in the existential crisis of like, am I actually a person or not because I'm a clone? So that's like a whole thing. But
yeah,
he's starting to try and get better. I don't know. Maybe you'll learn something in what you've read this week.
right. Well, so despite, listing off like several major deaths and bringing Peter sort of out of his funk, we haven't really had much in the way of moving forward with the Clone Saga as like a plot line or an event or anything. That really kicks into high gear in this particular story arc. We're going to go over smoke and mirrors. We're going to get a lot of movement in the Clone Saga for better and for worse.
Okay.
So we start with Web of Spider-Man Volume 1, number 122, which was written by J.M. DeMatteis and Todd DeZago, penciled by Stephen Butler, inked by Randy Emberlin, colored by Kevin Tinsley, and lettered by Steve Dutro. Todd DeZago, Kevin Tinsley, and Steve Dutro are the only returning creatives from the previous issue. That being said, a lot of these other people have been working on the Clone Saga in various degrees and other issues, which is great.
There's somewhat of a rotation.
So we start the issue following the Scarlet Spider as he swings across the city, feeling guilty about enjoying the thrill of being a superhero again, especially since he still views this as Peter's life.
I just think it's weird that he's like being a superhero again. Because, like, after all that we've been reading, unless somehow we're learning this is magically out of chronological order, which I don't think it is because there's been hints to, like, what you previously read and what I was reading. Like, he's been a superhero the whole time.
Yeah, I think it's more so I get the impression that what we have read so far is supposed to have taken place in a very short period of time.
Okay.
Uh, which kind of makes sense with, Peter being out sick. Um just like things happening back to back to back. It's just that We've read a fucking lot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think maybe it's just like, "Oh my god, this thing has plateaued for so long, I need some sort of movement." But, like, I don't know, I think this is one of those weird Ben Riley self-doubt things again,
Oh
where
yeah.
but it's like, "Bitch, you've been doing this the whole time. This is just a Tuesday for you."
Well,
So
we do get some movement here because like as he's swinging through the city, he gets thrown off guard through the sudden appearance of the image of the jackal appears in his mind.
Oh,
It
okay.
like out of nowhere, suddenly he's seeing the jackal and he just falls because he's just so completely unprepared for this, and he ends up falling to the building below him. Now,
Now we haven't have we seen now
not
I'm trying to jog my memory. We haven't seen him in what we've read so far. We've just, like, talked about the context of him.
right.
Okay.
So the jackal has not been in. He was in the original Clone Saga, and that is has kind of the last time we've seen him. There have been like in the comics, there have been jackal clones that have popped up, and then it's confusing because they don't actually look like the jackal. They look like a different thing entirely.
Yeah, like, I mean, I think I've seen photos. Like, one looks like a goblin, doesn't it?
So you might be thinking of Carrion, who is he is a jackal clone, but he kind of wears he's like a zombie and he kind of wears like the tattered clothes and stuff.
No, this one
Or
didn't have clothes. It was just like a goblin. It was green.
well, that's the jackal is green. I am sure at some point we'll come across something because the jackal is kind of a big deal, even though like I would still kind of put him as like a minor villain in terms of Spider-Man's story. It's just that
Especially with like pop culture too, because like I never heard of him before until we had to start talking about this stuff. And then I only knew that like, okay, he does cloning stuff. And that's
yeah,
all I
I
knew.
mean, that's kind of his big thing and it's really funny too because like as we talk about the jackal more and more, I think it's really important to keep in mind that his day job was he was a biology professor at a college.
Okay.
So if well, okay, I'll
So like
just
the
leave it.
guy that turns into the lizard. I sound like a 5-year-old about to be like, and then this happened, and then it came out of the sky. But isn't isn't there a Spider-Man villain that turns into a lizard and he was also a professor?
Yeah, his name is the lizard.
I love it. Where's
I
he? Can he be in this?
I don't know if he shows up throughout this. He's a weird character in that like every time they bring him back, they kind of have to backtrack any progress they've made with him to get him to be the villain again. Like
Mhm.
it's sort of like a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, where at the end of every story, they're like, all right, we've cured you. You're just Dr. Jekyll now. And then the next time they come around, they're like, oh, but maybe we didn't.
Okay, and we're still talking about the lizard man. We're
Yeah,
not
yeah,
talking
that's
about the jackal.
right, right. No, no, no.
Okay.
That's
Cool. All right, before I confuse myself any further than I potentially could.
oh, to confuse you even more, there is also a Marvel character named Mr. Hyde who is
Dumb.
essen-
That's rude.
it's essentially Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but it's just a guy who came up with the formula like that, and then he decided to name himself Mr. Hyde. It's so fun.
Love it. Fantastic. Okay, but so Scarlet Spider Ben Riley has a vision of the Jackal, who
Right.
is a weird clony lad,
Yes.
and he falls out of the sky now.
Yeah, he falls to the building below him. Now, at the same time, Peter is getting ready for dinner with his wife when he is also struck with an image of the jackal. When Peter tries to get over it and he goes to kiss his wife, suddenly his mind flashes to an image of Gwen Stacy. Now, that kind of throws him off a little bit because, like, he's with his wife. He doesn't want to be thinking of someone else while he's
Right.
with his wife. And Mary Jane starts to question what's wrong, and Peter just says that he must still be shaky from when he had what is essentially, I'm just going to call it the bird flu.
Bird poison!
You're
When
right.
he was bird poisoned.
You're So Mary Jane suggests, well, maybe we should just cancel our dinner. But Peter instead swoops her up and tells her that he can't wait to celebrate her pregnancy and their lives together. And this is one of the ongoing things that I'm really enjoying about Peter right now is his just absolute love for his wife and the fact that he will be a dad. It keeps coming up and I keep loving it.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like the one in this run of Spider-Man. It's like the redeeming factor of Peter Parker. Because there's
Yeah.
been a lot of things that he's decided to do that I'm just like, this is stupid. Or why are you doing this? Um, but every time he has like a good interaction with his wife, with like Mary Jane, I'm like, this all right. This is good. This is a guy who's just trying his best. And then he like puts like Dr. Octopus arms on himself, thinking he's immune, and then I'm like, God damn it. But then he hugs his wife again, and I'm like, ow. Ow. What a time. Okay. Cool.
So they go off to have dinner together, and then we cut to the Scarlet Spider, who has now left Manhattan to go to the Catskill Mountains just outside of the city. But he doesn't really know how he got there or why he got there. He just knew he had to go there. And he is then caught off guard by a short man wearing a Jackal costume who insists on being called Jack.
What does this guy look like?
So he looks like that sort of the green furred, big-eared Jackal. If you've seen the Jackal in the comics, he looks like him, just shorter.
Okay.
So Jack convinces Ben to follow him to a mysterious floating metal door, as he explains that this was all set up years ago by the Jackal and that everything behind the door is Ben's destiny. So like this door literally is just, it goes nowhere. It's just a floating door. It's
Oh.
one of the weirdest things. So
It's
then
not like a door built into a mountain or anything. It's just a door.
it's just the door.
Oh.
And so he goes further, Jack does, and tells Ben that in order to get inside the door, he has to defeat its defender. And just then, they are attacked by a massive creature with Peter Parker's face. But essentially, this hulking monstrosity that has like really long hair and looks just like Peter. Now,
Yeah.
this monstrous version of Peter has scarring all over its body that resembles the markings on Kane's costume. So I thought that was important to point out. It's like
Oh.
the weird veiny things that are all over Kane's costume. As all of this is happening, the real Peter Parker stops at the Daily Bugle to go over his insurance coverage while he's off work for Mary Jane's pregnancy, basically just making sure everything's in line so that when he has his kid, he's like, all right, everything's covered, we're good. And, it's just like proper dad stuff. I like that.
Oh my goodness, I love it.
As he
Next, he's
starts to,
gonna go buy a car seat.
right.
Oh.
And as he starts to leave, J. Jonah Jameson exits his office with Detective Jacob Raven. Now,
Oh.
you and I have seen Detective Raven before.
Yes.
Uh,
Because he is trying to solve a slew of murders that started in Salt Lake, Utah. And we think Kane did it because all of the markings of on the murder victims match the mark of Kane. And
right.
now that all these bad guys are getting murdered in New York, they like hired him to do it, to like solve the crime.
Yeah, he kind of like shows up and is like, hey, I have information.
Yeah.
Now, Raven has Jonah swear to keep what they spoke about a secret. And then when Joe Robertson asks what all that was about, Jonah tells him that he doesn't want to know. Like, he's just like, stay out of it, Joe.
Yeah.
So Peter is then struck by images of himself emerging from a cloning tank and the Jackal laughing in his face.
Okay.
Stumbling from this sudden shock, Detective Raven helps Peter back to his feet, which sets off his spider sense, but he doesn't know why. He just knows that when Detective Raven helps him up, something about that man is setting off his spider sense.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Mary Jane is visiting Aunt May with continuing to be the worst Aunt Anna when Anna suggests May dying might be a way of making room for Mary Jane's unborn child. Which is
That's
like
not
such
how
a
things
fucked up
work.
thing. It's so awful to say.
Oh
Maybe
my
she should
god.
die so you can have a baby. I
Quick,
fucking hate
Mary
this
Jane,
one.
pull the plug.
Now,
It's right there. Just do it.
one good thing about this though is like in this scene, May's eyes open very slightly and a single tear drops out before she goes back into her coma.
Oh
So
my
it's like that's like a
god.
really kind of weird and sweet moment. I
Because
actually
we
do like it.
haven't heard from her about her in
Right.
like a long time.
There
I haven't seen
was
anybody like visit her like in the past couple things I've read.
yeah, I mean there was Peter had gone to visit her, and there was like a weird moment where you saw things from her perspective, and that was interesting. But
Right.
really, as a character, I mean, she's been in a coma.
Yeah.
Back in the mountains, Ben is still fighting against the guardian of the door while Kane is watching from a distance.
Also, I gotta say, real quick,
Yeah.
because I just looked it up while you were talking about them in the Catskills. It is from Manhattan to the Catskills Mountains, a 2 hour and 25 or 2 hour and 26 minute drive to get there. Now, I am assuming that Ben Riley does not have a car
Yeah, I
because
would assume that.
he's a New Yorker. He's probably using public transportation. And there's no trains to get you to the Catskills. So if he didn't drive the 2 hour and 25 minute drive, he would have walked for 1 day and 15 hours. Or if he's on the little slower side at one point, 1 day and 17 hours. So how did he get there?
I'm assuming he walked because this is where it like
So he
time start.
blacked out for like a
Yeah,
day and a half?
time gets a little funky here, and I can tell you that the scene where the scene where Peter says he's gonna go out with his wife, she specifically says lunch, but when they go outside, it is clearly nighttime.
Maybe it's
So I think
winter. Maybe it's
so
a
I think
late lunch or
it
a
could
late
be,
perhaps. Have you ever had a good dinner before? Oh, delightful.
but I think when Ben winds up in the mountains, it is daylight. So it does seem like some time has passed, but they don't really mention it in the story. It's just sort of like, and now this.
Like, and I'm not one who gets like, I don't like to be picky about, you
No,
know,
I think
details.
those
However,
details are important.
however, there was a point when you said the Catskills, and there was a very small point where I was like, I forgot that they were in New York. There's no way they can be that close to New York City. What's happening? So I had to look it up there. And also, I think ever since the whole is it an apartment or is it a lawyer office game that I had to play last episode, I'm becoming a bit like skeptical of a lot of things just because it threw me off so much.
Well, I don't know if you remember. Have you seen the the TMNT movies that were produced by Michael Bay? I don't remember who the director
No,
was,
I
but
don't like Michael Bay.
yeah, I they're not good movies. But there is in that movie they are in a snowy mountain at like one point, and it's just like I'm assuming the Catskills, but like I don't know, none of it really matches up with like the rest of the movie. It threw me out the like
Right.
immediately. But
Yeah,
anyway,
there's just some things. I mean, like Max was telling me about he had watched the movie Unfriended with a friend of his when it came out. And there wasn't like oh, I gotta add Bobby!
what's going
When
on?
you watched Unfriended with Mandy, what was the button that was missing that threw you off and took you out of it?
So it's not me. This is okay, for anyone who doesn't know, Unfriended is a really bad. Oh, okay, sorry, I'll speak into the mic. Unfriended is a really bad horror movie filmed entirely over a Skype call.
Yes.
So everything that's happening to the characters you see through the perspective of a computer screen. And my friend Mandy, who I saw this with at the time, was on no social media.
Correct.
So when things were glitching out on like Facebook and Instagram and like iMessage on the characters' MacBooks, no impact on her. It was like not unnerving at all. But then there's a scene where she goes to attempt to send an email and like the send button was missing on Gmail, and Mandy grabbed my shoulder and said, "Something's not right." It was really as if I was watching it with my 79-year-old grandmother and not my like 17-year-old friend at the time that movie came out.
Well, because like the send button arguably is the most important button on Gmail.
No, agree. Then there was clearly something wasn't right.
Yeah.
But up until that point, like I think characters had already died as well. So it was like,
so the stakes were already high.
The stakes were already
but they were even higher when the send button was taken.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
All right. Well, thanks for letting me guest spot.
Thank you, Bubby.
Here. I'll be back. Keep building my treehouse.
Bye, best friend.
Bye. Love you.
That's my best friend.
I kind of want to watch a movie with this person just because the idea of watching a horror movie where someone goes, "Something's not right," sounds great.
I really, when we did the whole Comicsgate series,
yeah,
I had to be like laser focused. Like I was trying because I didn't know anything or anyone. I was focused. Max would be like, "Oh, do you want a drink before you like do your podcast?" And I was like, "I can't. I won't understand anything that's gonna go on." Like, I'm so glad we're doing Spider-Man now because I can like do whatever before.
Yeah, this I was trying. So part of doing the Comicsgate stuff, I was trying to I was trying to pack as much information in as possible to give you like a good idea of like the things that go on and like what is important to understand, but also not to spend forever on just talking about like
Ethan Van
Ethan Van Sciver. I didn't want to spend 6 episodes just talking about him because we could spend 6 episodes talking just about Ethan Van Sciver. I thought what was more important was to talk about the things around him, the things that he caused, and the ways that he sort of impacted. Right. But the downside of that is that it was a fuckload of information.
Yes. Which you can now listen to. It's all there. Yeah. But anyway, back to Spider-Man.
So Ben is knocked unconscious. Yeah, he's knocked unconscious during the fight.
Okay.
And as Jack and the Guardians start to leave, Jack mentions that they need to be prepared for the other one's arrival. Now, keep in mind, because I think we kind of skipped over it real quick, Kane is watching this whole thing, which I think is really funny because that has been his one trait. It's been like he kills people and he just stands in the distance and watches people. Those are the 2 things he does.
Yeah, he's good at standing, and then I think he has only successfully murdered 2 people out of like the 5. So he's not even that good at like killing people.
Yeah. But okay, so just then,
like he killed 2 goons, but like that was just as an entrance scene. And then everything after that has been incredibly whelming. Okay, so he's been watching. Has he been listening?
Yeah, he's been listening. Watching? He hasn't done anything though. Just watching and listening.
Okay.
And just then, Spider-Man back in New York City gets a vision of the Scarlet Spider laying beaten in the snow. How he gets this vision, we don't know. But he instinctively knows where to find him, so he rushes off to help him, which ends the issue.
Okay, I have to ask, did he jump in a car? Or is he just
Nope.
running?
He just like swings off. So you can imagine somehow he like let's be charitable, and there's a helicopter going to the Catskills at that exact moment.
There's been an avalanche.
So he
They got
like
snow patrol out there.
latches on to the helicopter right as they're on their way out. I don't know. But that takes us to Amazing Spider-Man Volume 1, number 399, which is written by J.M.D. Matias, penciled by Mark Bagley, inked by Larry Malstead, colored by Bob Sharon, and lettered by Bill Oakley, which is the same creative team as the previous Amazing Spider-Man, which I love to see. I'm going to keep calling these out because I think it's important to see when there is a big changeover from issue to issue.
I will call them out, or I will leave screenshots of the credits that they write out in the comic books themselves. Just as a little asterisk note. Anyway, go on.
Now, we start this issue with Kane examining Ben's unconscious body before being confronted by Scryer, who informs him that the spider is not dead. Now, when Kane tells Scryer to leave him alone, Scryer says that he has nothing to fear from him yet, and suddenly disappears. Just then, Kane realizes someone else is coming, and he hides in the shadows to see that Spider-Man has arrived. So he just kind of like scurries off.
Okay.
And I will never not think it's funny that like Kane is watching someone and then someone is watching Kane. Like,
yeah, and then just regular Spider-Man shows off, and Kane's like, gotta go fast.
Yeah.
Because he's had like conscious interactions with Scarlet Spider.
But not with Peter.
He keeps like running away from Peter Parker Spider-Man.
Right.
Which has not been explained.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think I made the guess that like the three of them were connected genetically for some reason, because there was a while ago where they all shared the same like weird, like hysterical migraine hallucination.
Mm-hmm.
And they've noted multiple times that their spidey senses don't work with each other.
Yeah.
But we don't know anything. Like, nothing's been actually confirmed.
Yeah. They've just been like, if you take those pieces of evidence, I guess you could call that hinting. But it's really just kind of like stuff that's there and you kind of have to dig for it.
Yeah, it's hinting, and then you kind of, I mean, like, 'cause I'd say it's hinting in like the way that comic books in like the 80s and 90s do. They're like, oh, how strange. I didn't sense him coming. And I'm like, yeah, I should probably remember that.
Ben then slowly starts to wake up, and the two Spider-Men share notes on what brought them here before being confronted by Jack.
Oh, so the two Spideys now are actually like talking to each other.
Yeah, they have now started an actual dialogue.
Is it like a pleasant thing? Are they just like talking like coworkers, catching up each other on like what their shift work was? Or are they like not happy to see each other?
No, Peter at one point, I don't think he says it out loud, but in his like thought like caption boxes, he references Ben as a brother, which I think is really interesting because he also gets super annoyed with Ben. I mean, I guess that makes sense. But
so he's just like, "Oh, hello, sir. How are you?"
Yeah, it's kind of nice.
Gotcha.
So Jack shows up, and Jack tells them that he knows why they're here, but refuses to tell them anything. So both Spider-Man.
What a bitch move.
I know this. So I actually kind of like Jack, but he's incredibly annoying. I can see why people hate this character, but I think he's kind of fun in like a very weird way.
Well, you know what? I think I get it. I get why people hate him, and I get why the writers did it. Because as of right now, it seems like they want to reveal something, but the writers don't know what they're revealing. So they're like, let's bring out this guy, this weird little goblin furry man, and make him play tricks on people to buy us time to the real reveal. And since he's so annoying, people will be, distracted by his natural annoyingness that we don't have to do anything drastic yet.
Yeah, and I think we'll get into this at the end, but I think that I'm willing to bet the writers they either had a lot of constraints in terms of how they could position things, or they had a lot of time constraints, because I feel like the way this was written was not good. Um, so anyway, both of the Spider-Men,
Yes.
Scarlet Spider and Spider-Man proper, chase after Jack, and they arrive at the floating door again. Now, when they examine it, they find handprint scanners that cause the door to open, and they see Jack on the other side. Now, I'm also going to point out they use their gloved hands to open the said door with the handprint scanner. So I don't think it's that good of a handprint scanner, but it worked and it opens.
You know what I didn't think about until just now? With the Scarlet Spider's costume, I like for a second was like, I pictured bare hands as a part of the costume, and it made me physically uncomfortable. Like, I was like, pale hands? Oh, God, no. Glove hands. Glove hands. Like,
What about that specific image? Do you think is like
that's unsettling?
Yeah.
It's like seeing your teacher's knees.
That's a weird.
It's a part of their body that you don't expect in that kind of environment.
I guess so, yeah.
And it weirded me out. You know?
Yeah.
Like, I don't think I've ever seen one of my male teachers in shorts, and I don't intend to ever have that happen. Like, I don't need to see, like, I don't know, I can't think of a single teacher that I had at this point. Or, oh God, and I wouldn't want to see any of my chef's knees. Like, because that's a food safety hazard. My goodness. Oh, if I saw like Chef Poirot's knees, I'd be like, sir, you're in the kitchen. Where are your proper pants? You know, maybe that's closer to what it's like. Because it's like, why do you not have cover them up?
Yeah, like it
Don't
doesn't.
get your fingies cut.
Your costume is a particular way. Why are you not following the very rigid guidelines that we have given you?
that your drawers have drawn for you.
Yeah.
But now I'm thinking about it, and I can't picture what his hands look like.
Like, they look like hands.
The gloves? What color are the gloves? I'm fine. You can keep going.
So the two of them go inside, and as soon as they're inside, Peter's spider sense goes off, and the door closes behind them. So Jack leads the two into a massive lab, and I mean massive lab.
Oh,
this thing is gigantic. It's like a football arena just underground.
Oh.
And when they get in there, Jack informs them that this is where they were all created and that the Jackal will be joining them soon. Now, if this is true, that means Professor Miles Warren, biology teacher at a university, had enough money to somehow purchase or create a lab in the Catskill Mountains that is fucking gigantic. Which goes along with like the weirdness that we've seen with Dr. Seward Trainer, who just has like labs across New York that he doesn't give a shit about.
Yeah. But he has one that he actively uses in like Pennsylvania or something.
Right. Like, so
they have to
all
be
of these
like
scientists must be billionaire. Like they can't even
really
be
gotta be like messing with their taxes or like grants that were given for their programs or something they just tucked away from themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
so like even like with Dr. Trainer, he's got it. There is something unscrupulous like he's not a good person.
Yeah, and I mean like for you said his name's Miles Warren.
Yeah, that's the Jackal's name.
I mean like if you're gonna be like a bad guy, is stealing money really that like big of a deal for you? So I guess like maybe that's what I don't know. But to have a MetLife Stadium amount of space. That's
Right.
a lot of space. You can have a lot of marching bands in there.
That's true.
I would know.
Now,
I
when
was one of them.
Spider-Man responds to Jack, claiming the Jackal will be back soon, he says that it's impossible since they watched the Jackal die. And Jack points out that he watched Ben die as well. And yet here Ben is, which is a very good point because we still have not received an explanation for how Ben's alive.
Yeah, and I mean, like, also, if this guy's calling himself Jack,
Yeah.
he's probably like at least a third of a Jackal.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe 2/3 because he took most of the title.
Mm-hmm.
You know, 4 out of the 6 letters. That's 2/3. I can do math. I've done so much math in this episode.
I'm very proud of you.
4 times 7. Fractions. I have a degree. He's probably some form of the Jackal. So I'm sure if the Jackal was that crazy, I also feel like this is one of those names that if I say it like 3 times, like it'll just appear like Beetlejuice.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sure if he copied himself enough, there would be enough of himself to like
To make a little
resuscitate
version of
him.
himself.
Yeah, you have Big Jackal and you have Little Jackal, and then you have like Jackal that's a cowboy. I don't know. Could be anything.
Now, just then, they are attacked by the Guardian again, but it's clear that the Guardian is actually in pain. See, he then falls to the floor and says it's happening to him like it's happened to all of the others. And Jack
Oh.
shows genuine concern for the Guardian.
And the
But
Guardian is the
the
creature
big, like,
that-
hulking Peter Parker.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he dies in Jack's arms. Like, he just falls over and dies.
Oh.
So at that point, Jack removes his mask and reveals that he is also a Peter Parker clone
Oh my
and-
god.
and has the same scarring across his face. Now, he informs them that this is the fate of all of the clones because they all start to deteriorate.
Oh.
So that's like what was happening to the Guardian. That's what's happening to Jack.
And
They
that's
get
what's
these
happening to
scars
Kane.
and they start dying. Well, that's the implication here.
Oh, true, because we don't know about Kane yet.
We don't know shit about Kane yet.
I don't think but I mean, like, if the markings are the same, I'm gonna, perhaps I'll assume, I'll make an ass out of you. So he just dies.
Yeah, he dies. Apparently, it's a thing that happens. Like, as if you're a clone, you have, I guess, it like you're just unstable, so you have like a limited lifespan. So you just start to fall apart.
Right.
So just then, there's a giant pod nearby, and it opens up, and out walks the Jackal, having genetically modified his body to look just like his costumed counterpart, including the green fur and claws. So now that's just his biology. He just looks that way.
Okay.
And he tells them, now I also think it's funny, he walks out completely naked. And there's like ooze dripping off of him, and that's what covers his naughty bits. There's a lot of strategic nudity in this story. It's very weird.
Okay.
So he tells them that Jack and the Guardian were his earliest failures, but the Spider-Men are his greatest successes. He continues to explain that the Jackal that died in the explosion was actually a clone that he placed in case something went bad. And this is later revealed to be a lie. Like in 2016, when they bring the Jackal back for another storyline. So like way after this, they're like, oh yeah, no, that was bullshit. That's not true. They just keep retconning and retconning and retconning things with the Jackal, and it's always clone related.
And maybe I shouldn't have had wine for this episode because now I feel like I have to focus again.
So the Jackal comes out of the pod and he claims to be the original, but the one that died he claims was a clone.
Yes. No, that I understand. But did we discover that in this issue that you just read? Or did they change it again in 2016? Or
In
did they tell
2016
you that in 2016?
he says that now, but in 2016
They change it again.
they change it again.
Okay.
Because that's just how comic books do. It's retcon after retcon after retcon.
Okay.
And look,
I
I'm
can
here
live
for
with
some
this.
of it,
That's
but
fine.
there's a bit much, So
Okay.
now
no further questions, Your Honor. Let's do this.
we then pan out and we see that Kane has also entered the lab, and guess what?
Is he just watching?
He's watching from a distance.
Oh boy.
So Jackal takes the two Spider-Men to a regeneration tank and suggests that both of them are clones, but that the real Peter Parker is inside the tank. Now, Peter, Spider-Man, thinks that he's lying and he tries to attack him, but Ben tries to stop him, which then causes the two of them to start arguing, and they're just like fighting like brothers, like little brothers.
Yeah.
Peter refuses to believe that he could be a clone since he just got his life back on track and is having a child, which isn't really like a reason why you're not a clone. It's just reasons why you don't want to be a clone.
Right.
And this all surprises Ben, who at up until this point, Ben did not know that Mary Jane was pregnant. So he finds out during an argument with Peter that Mary Jane is pregnant. So like, it's another thing that he feels like is taken away from him. It's like, oh, you get to have a baby. I don't get to have a baby. So then we get to see the inverse of like Peter's excitement for having a child is Ben's ennui.
Right.
So Ben then becomes furious that Peter is unable to face what he faces every day, which is knowing he's a copy. He's like, how can you not come to terms with this? I have to fucking deal with it all the time.
Yeah.
So when Peter says he can't take anything the Jackal has to offer, Jackal opens the chamber, and instead of finding another Peter Parker, they are greeted by Gwen Stacy, which closes out the issue. Now, and this is another one of those moments of
the real Peter Parker is Gwen Stacy.
Strategic nudity is it like employed here, where it's like instead of ooze coming off, it's like smoke or something comes out of the chamber, and it's just like nipple coverings.
Right.
You see everything except the parts that are like not supposed to be printed in a at least
to keep
somewhat,
it PG-13.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now that leads us all the way into Spider-Man Volume 1, number 56, which is going to be the last issue in this story arc.
This has been a journey.
This has only been 2 issues so far. We've had all of this.
Yeah.
Spider-Man 56 was written by Howard Mackey, penciled by Tom Lyle, inked by Scott Hanna, colored by Kevin Tinsley, lettered by Richard Starkings, and Comicraft. And this continues the trend of a different creative team from the previous issue. Howard Mackey, Kevin Tinsley, and Richard Starkings are the only creatives to continue into this issue from the previous issue. So,
which is one thing that sometimes like throws me off.
Mm-hmm.
I like that everyone has a job, and that makes me happy. But as like a reader, like when I was reading Hack Slash,
yeah,
I really liked the story, and I thought the story was fun, but there were points where the art would change on me.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one where it was like in the middle of an issue the art changed on me.
Mm-hmm.
And it really like took me out of it. Because I would get connected to the look of something. And because with comics, it's like, yes, the writing and the plot, but it's also, the art like connects you to the story. And if it keeps changing and changing, it's hard for me personally as a reader to like stay connected with it. Um, so like I think that's been one of the challenges of doing this is because they keep having a cycle. And thankfully, like so far, all of the art has been fairly like similar styles to each other. But like it does kind of make it like it's noticeable the difference sometimes, you know?
Yeah, and you also have to keep in mind that like the way that the story is being portrayed to you is so heavily dependent on the artist. So the pacing changes, the way that shots are composed changes, which can change how you feel about a story.
Yeah.
It uh it is I tend to be one of the people that prefers I am fine with changing things up. I think it makes more sense to keep a creative team for a particular story. And then when you're done with that story, you can have a different creative team. Now, if it's a
Yeah,
saga,
absolutely. Like I've read like I don't know, like 4 different Batman things
mhm,
and none of them are the same. Like but at least throughout the story the art is the same. So like when I was reading
yeah,
White Knight, the art is the same, but when I was reading like Long Halloween, like the art's different there and it plays into the story and that made me like it more even though I may like objectively like how so and so is drawn in one thing compared to another, but when you look at it overall as a reading experience, I have no qualms with that. I think when I'm reading, let's say, like right now, I'm gonna have to read after this. It's what like pawns and something.
like players and
Players
pawns
and
or something.
pawns is what I'm gonna have to read next. So, like, I'm expecting a finite story somewhat. It's a sequel finite story, but it's a finite story. I would like, as a reader, some togetherness to it. And if you keep changing the art drastically, when you're in one section, it makes it tough. Um, but anyway, that's my little rant.
Well, I will also I'm going to piggyback off of that because I will tell you one of the things that has always annoyed me as a comic book reader is this insistence on having interconnected storylines in different books. So I'm a big fan of how I mean I'm a big X-Men fan, as I've mentioned before. I like the way that the X-Men are, for the most part, being handled in modern stories, where you have maybe six or seven. I think there's more, but six or seven different X-Men books. But if you're getting a particular book, it is telling you a very particular story following a very specific cast of characters.
Yeah, like you don't have to worry so much about knowing what is canonically true.
Right.
Is that
And
what
well,
you're
and
saying?
there's that, but there's also uh this run on Spider-Man and the way the X-Men were being done at the exact same time. So in the early 90s over at Marvel, and I can tell you exactly why. It's because they thought they could get away with it. They could get more money this way.
Mhm.
But the way that it was done was you have I'm going to stick with X-Men because it's a little bit easier. X-Men and Uncanny X-Men. Those are two different comic books.
Mhm.
But in order to understand the story that's being told, you need to buy both comic books
Yeah.
because they will tell you part one in X-Men and part two in Uncanny X-Men. And
Right.
that's how Spider-Man's being treated right now. You pick up Amazing Spider-Man, then you pick up a Web of Spider-Man, then you
Then
pick
you
up
pick up
that.
Amazing Spider-Man. Yeah.
Right. And that these are all being produced, it's essentially once a week you have a different comic book to buy. And at the time, let's say these are $2, that's a lot of money to be shelling out every month to keep picking up four different titles to follow one storyline.
Yeah.
Just make it like there is no reason to make Spider-Man a Spider-Man story broken into four other than from a marketing perspective, so that you have to buy all of them. When it could be, all right, the Peter Parker Spider-Man story is going to be, we're going to tell Smoke and Mirrors in Amazing Spider-Man. We're going to tell Players and Pawns in Spectacular Spider-Man. Now, the downside to that is they all come out at the same time, so you can't really build off of one another. So you would have to build in, you would have to have a really good editor, where you would have to build in filler to pad out what's going on. That being said, some of the time, filler is the best thing for these characters, because you're not constantly going from big action set piece and emotional turmoil to the next. You have a quiet issue where Peter gets to sit down and have dinner with his wife, and they talk about what's been happening, and you get to know the characters a little bit more.
Yeah.
That would be my ideal outcome. This is with 40 years of hindsight.
Yeah, and it's
for
also
how this is being
the
produced.
last question I will ask, and then we can get into this issue. Is it at least still Bob Budiansky as the editor-in-chief right now?
Yeah, I'm going to be calling out when we're cycling through the editors. So we have, I think, Bob. At this point, now you have me questioning myself. So from what I have been able to gather, at the very least, Bob Budiansky, he took over as the editor of the Spider-Man line. So he's the editor-in-chief of Spider-Man titles. Not necessarily the editor-in-chief at Marvel. And there are editors that work underneath him. And he took over around the time of Web of Life, Web of Death.
Yes.
Okay, so that's kind of where we are. And he's going to stick around for a bit. But then there's going to be like ins and outs of different people working on different things. It's going to get all kinds of confusing editorially.
Right.
But that's part of the fun of this.
Wow!
This issue begins with the Jackal claiming that Gwen Stacy, the one that just exited the big ass tank, is in fact the real Gwen Stacy that he helped cheat death. Now, Spider-Man is furious at this assertion and refuses to believe that she is anything but another clone to mess with his mind. He lunges at the Jackal, but is stopped by Gwen, who reveals that she knows he is Peter and that what the Jackal says is true, which I would argue is evidence that she is not the real Gwen Stacy, because Gwen didn't know he was Peter.
Yeah. It's also this, like, the Jackal just seems like clearly like the biggest gaslighter.
He's an internet
like
troll
a
come to
campy
life.
degree. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, campy is the name of the game. It is fucking weird. He walks around like he's the Joker in this story. And that's not necessarily how he was ever portrayed before. And I think they're trying to go with he's crazy. And like that's the thing that is like his new persona, and that's what makes him dangerous, which I would say also is stigmatizing mental health and weird, but it's a common trope in fiction, so I'll give it a pass, I guess.
Right. There is and then I promise we can continue talking about the subject we're here to talk about. But there is a YouTube channel that recorded a bunch of like character work of like these quick little comedy skits. And it's all like college student stuff. And there's one that this guy does. I can't remember his name right now, but I promise I will find it. And he does this thing, and it's like Batman's weirdest villain, the barking glass. And it's like, it's not like mean, it's all like harmless, like goofs. And it's just like the thing that makes him dangerous is just that he's so freaking random. Like, is that he has no gimmick. So
well, that would be a dangerous thing to Batman, because he constantly is looking for patterns. So that
Yeah.
actually kind of makes sense.
So, like, that's what made it great, but the Jackal does have a gimmick, it's cloning, and he's just weird on top of that. So,
Yeah,
he is unfortunately not the barking glass of Spider-Man.
his aesthetic also, like, none of, if I were to sit down and try to sell you on the brand that is the Jackal, you would ask me to leave because none of it goes together. It's
Right.
a man that calls himself the Jackal, who is upset that the student he was in love with died and started cloning people. All right, I'm with you so far. But he wears a Jackal costume that is green for some reason and enters into like a weird life of crime where he then starts just cloning everyone and coming up with convoluted plans where he just tries to convince everyone they're either the real person or a clone. It doesn't, like, none of it, you lost the thread somewhere along the line.
Yeah, he's really weird, and I can't express that anymore. He's kind of like, oh, what is the character in Sandman where they do A Midsummer Night's Dream?
Puck.
He's like Puck.
I A Midsummer Night's
Isn't
Dream
Puck
is
a
my favorite Shakespearean
hobgoblin?
story. Yeah, he's the little hobgoblin.
That I he should have
He also kind of looks like him.
that's who should be the hobgoblin. And they're just and then the other villain in Spider-Man should be the Jackal.
I think we need to like find a time machine to go back and change
Marvel,
this.
hire me.
So
I don't
then,
have anything to do with the literature or writing field or entertainment, but hire me. 'Cause
so
I've hit
Ben
the hours in which I am cocky today.
so then Ben grabs the villain and demands that they talk, with the Jackal saying that they do need to discuss many things, and coyly asks how Aunt May is doing. Which brings us back to the hospital where Mary Jane is sitting with May and begging her to come back to them.
Is this where we also find out that Dr. Octopus is not the only one that tried to woo Aunt May?
No, we will, in an episode or two, I do have a lot of information I'm going to dump on you about Aunt May.
I
But I'm
can't wait.
waiting for a
She's my
couple of
favorite
things.
character.
uh, so then Mary Jane is sitting with May and begging her to come back when we actually get to see May's thoughts as she's able to realize that Mary Jane is pregnant and is happy for them. But she says she's just too tired to recover. She cannot bring herself to gather the strength to come out of her coma. Which cuts back to then the Jackal convincing Ben to watch Peter and Gwen together. And he claims that because of him, Ben could end up with Mary Jane or the resurrected Stacy. He's basically saying, like, if you come with me, I can help you take whatever life you want. If you want to have Gwen Stacy back, you can have her. If you want to have Mary Jane, you can have her. I can help you.
And he's saying this to Peter Parker.
No, he's saying this to Ben.
Oh.
Yeah,
Okay.
he then he tells him that he feels bad for everything he put Ben through. But at the while he's talking to him, they're interrupted by Jack, who starts begging for a cure to the degeneration
The
effect.
degeneration, yeah.
Yeah. Angry at this interruption, the Jackal quickly tosses his lackey to the side before telling Ben that he is really trying to tell him the truth. And Spider-Man then begins trashing the lab as he refuses to believe anything that he's witnessing. He just starts like punching computers.
Okay.
Which continues Peter's just dumbass attempts at doing anything throughout the Clone Saga. He's one of the worst characters going on right now.
It seems like he learned something from the mechanical arms.
You
Just destroy everything.
Now, as this continues, Jackal tries to convince Ben that everything he said earlier was a lie and that Ben is the real Peter Parker. So he's gone back and forth over and over, being like, you're both clones. Actually, now Peter's real. Actually, no, Ben, you're real. He keeps changing his mind.
Right.
And he explains that he used mind control to convince all of them of like, Ben is the real is the clone and Peter is the real one. Uh yeah, maybe. I don't know. Like none of this really matters because there's no evidence of anything. He just keeps spouting bullshit.
This seems more like if someone's lying to you that much, maybe you should just live your life. And then if you degenerate in the way the others did, I guess you now know.
Right.
You know?
He keeps offering to give Ben his old life back. And we do the same thing that we've been doing over the last 3 issues. We pan out and we see Kane is watching from the shadows, reminding readers that he still exists and he's still just there watching. That's all he's there to do. But this time, again, we see Scryer is behind him, silently watching him. So
Have we met Scryer before?
very briefly, he was in the Power and Responsibility the first story arc. And
Oh.
like Peter just runs into him and he's like kind of friends with Judas Traveler. That's all we know. He's like a white, like a very pale dude that wears a black cloak and pals around with Judas Traveler. That's it. That's all we got.
Okay.
it's, it's
Weird.
just very weird. And I think this is around the. I don't know what was causing this. I would have to try to figure it out. Uh, but I think the idea was mystery is what sells a character. So that's why you have Judas Traveler, who has all of these powers, but we don't know anything about him other than he's like a psychiatrist or something. And then we have Scryer, who is just this weirdly looking person who shows up at random times, but we don't know anything about them. We have Kane, who stands around in the shadows watching things, maybe at some point doing something, and we don't know anything about them.
You know, I think they took the term kill your darlings the wrong way. Like,
This.
they had Venom,
Mhm.
and a lot of people like Venom, at least now. Maybe I'm thinking of this, keep in mind, from the 2023 perspective.
Yeah.
But, like, Venom is, as far as I'm concerned, one of the more popular villains. You
Mhm.
had him in for a little session, and now he's just gone. He's separated. And then you have Dr. Octopus, definitely one of the most popular ones. And you kill him.
Mhm.
Like, did they not recognize that those were villains that were, like, giving them success? Or, like,
Well, with Venom, they actually gave him his own title. I think with
yeah.
Doc Ock, the idea, I think they were really trying to push into a new direction to get people on board. And I don't know why they thought, let's kill off Doc Ock.
And then just give him the worst funeral ever.
It is a weird thought process they went through. But I also think that a lot of this reminds me of like JJ Abrams style of like screenwriting, where it's just, don't worry about what the mystery is, just write the mystery and figure it out later. And part of that is then, you end up killing off people because, oh, it's a big shocker and that'll get people's attention. But then it's a hollow story. You haven't done any, like Doc Ock like the good thing about his death is that he did a good thing before he died, but it also wasn't, I don't know. I don't think it was utilized super
Yeah, and
well.
you could have arguably had anyone else save him. You could have had Dr. Seward save Spider-Man from bird poison.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is I am also of the opinion, I think I've mentioned this before. If you're going to kill a character, it needs to be a method of telling more stories. Because a lot of people argue, oh, there need to be stakes involved. Yeah, there are always stakes involved in a story. They're artificial. You can make stakes whatever you want them.
Yeah.
I remember when the Avengers movies kept coming out, everyone was saying, oh, you have to kill one of the Avengers, otherwise there's no real stakes. Bullshit. You can have plenty of things going on. And I don't care about killing a character. I don't think that gives any credence to a story unless you're using that death to tell a different story.
Exactly.
you are actually ending a character's arc and you're ending a character's story early to get shock value or to add a manufactured stakes onto a story, and it doesn't make sense to
Yeah, no, I get that. Because shock value only lasts so long. It
me.
doesn't
Right.
make it rereadable.
Hmm. And like, you know, not to spoil Avengers Endgame, but like Iron Man's death makes sense. You end his story arc and you give stories to other characters to deal with the death of that character.
Yeah.
You but if you go back to Age of Ultron, how many people other than like Wanda, and that's dealt with like once in all of the MCU, gave a shit that her brother died? Like
Yeah.
nobody. Like it was a thing that happened and they were like, "Oh, a character died. Moving on."
What a weird time.
So back to this mess of a story. The Jackal then tries to convince Ben that he needs to kill Peter to take his life back. But again, he is interrupted by Jack, who keeps trying to bug him for a cure. Jackal realizes that this is going nowhere and decides to attack Ben, starting a fight between him and both of the Spider-Men. Everyone is just like impatient as shit in this story, and they just keep fighting for no reason.
Well, and that's kind of also maybe how you can tell that it's not true. Is like, oh, you just have to kill this guy
Mhm.
because you're the real one. It's like, well, why would I have to kill the clone if I'm the real one?
It's a weird thing also in that like all of these little tricks of like trying to convince Ben that he's the real one, or trying to convince both of them that they are clones. These are interesting story arcs that you can go through. These are interesting things that you can do if you are a little more subtle about it instead of just yelling, "Oh no, 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 you're the fake one. No, 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 you're the fake one." You're not convincing to anybody. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So then,
And especially
I,
to have such like a unique and unhinged character, it's like you can't really believe what this character is saying.
right,
You want someone that's like really cunning and like manipulative
yeah.
in like a professional sense almost to be trying to trick these people instead of just like, aha, it's you. Rah! Like I don't
And
know.
going further with this, as they're fighting, the Jackal then says, "I lied. Peter is the real Peter Parker." So like he just keeps changing his mind and keeps like going back and forth on all these things. And
Yeah.
Spider-Man demands the Jackal admit that the clones were not really clones, because we mentioned this a little bit in a previous episode where Spider-Man had met with the High Evolutionary in a previous story arc, and the High Evolutionary stated that the Jackal's clones were not real clones. They were people that were changed by like a virus into looking and acting like other people. It was it I from my understanding is they were just trying to get rid of clones like as a story
Right.
concept, and that was their way of just writing that out of existence. um it, it's kind of dumb. Jackal, like his only response to this is stating that the High Evolutionary was lying. So like this is the first time that they've actually addressed this within the Clone Saga. uh so it's interesting that it's brought up and then just immediately brushed aside, because they don't have an answer for why this was established before the Clone Saga started. And then now that the Clone Saga has started, they're like, "Oh no, 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 they're really clones this time." Is they're trying to have their cake and eat it too.
Yeah. And it's also again it's back to my 5-year-old and like analogy. It's like, when a little kid is like you're playing with a kid and they don't like what you're doing and then they're like, "Well, actually like I'm the king of the castle." I've actually always been the king of the castle. You're not anymore. That was all a lie. Like
Yeah,
this.
that's kind of the storytelling that we're going through. Not just with the Jackal, but with like all of the writers that are involved in this are doing the exact same thing.
Yeah.
So Jackal then tries to convince Peter to kiss Gwen because he argues that he will immediately realize that she's the original once he kisses her. Doesn't quite make sense, but okay, if you're going from like a romantic like concept, okay, sure, whatever. But Peter refuses because he has changed so much since she died that it wouldn't really matter, which is again, the
That's the
redeeming
best
thing
decision he's ever made in
the
this
the
whole
redeeming
thing.
thing for Peter is his love for his wife and his unborn child. It is the one thing I can keep coming back to and going, hell yeah, man. I am on board with you.
This seems like this is where it should have ended.
Yeah. So
Because there's many like other loose ends.
just then Gwen starts to deteriorate in front of their eyes, proving in fact she was a clone.
Yeah.
So that story goes nowhere.
Cool.
And then we're confronted by Jackal is confronted by the two Spider-Men and states that neither Ben nor Peter are the original. And then he disappears through like a mirror or a teleportation. Like it's just this thing that he walks into
Okay.
that they can't walk through.
Weird.
It like teleports him somewhere else. Again, biology professor.
Yeah.
So as he leaves, he also informs them that they are failed experiments and he sets his lab to self-destruct because every lab has to have a self-destruct.
Everything needs a self-destruct button. We all have one.
The readers then get to see Jack staring at the remains of Gwen as he is fearful of what is going to happen to him. Like he sees his own future when he sees Gwen's dead body on the floor.
And he knows he's a clone.
Yes. So he refuses to accept his destiny and he decides to help Spider-Man and the Scarlet Spider escape the building, but he is caught by the Jackal on their way out. So he's not allowed to leave with Spider-Man and Scarlet Spider. He gets stuck with Jackal.
Yeah.
Once they're outside, Peter asks Ben if he believes anything that they were told, and Ben responds that he is used to being sold lies and that Peter will have to get used to it. And as the two leave, we see that the whole scene is being watched by the Jackal and Jack. But then we also see that they are being watched by Kane. And then we see that Kane is being watched by Scryer. Because this is what is being done right now.
This is too much.
This sums up so much of the Clone Saga with just mysteries on top of mysteries and people dramatically watching events unfold with no understanding of why or any of like what the fuck is happening here. Yeah. It's just that is where we are right now. So we've pushed forward, but we've introduced like a ton of new weird mysteries, and like this doesn't add up to anything.
No, it doesn't.
Now we do have one last scene that closes out the comic. We go into the remains of the lab, which isn't like it like exploded a little bit, you know,
right.
like it kind of exploded, but like it's still standing. And you are in we're in the remains of the lab, and there's an unopened pod still laying in the ruins, and it's implied the real Peter Parker is inside. And that's how we end the comic. So that was Smoke and Mirrors, which was a fucking time.
I don't know if it's like the 2 glasses of wine I've had through this process or the story itself, but now I have a headache.
I'm gonna blame the story.
I think it's like the story too, because what a time. That was a lot. Also, like, Kane was fairly irrelevant throughout this whole story still. Mm-hmm. And then even more so, they were like, let's add this other guy. to make him even more relevant. And that's where like the kill your darlings comes in. And they didn't do it. Instead, they killed Dr. Octopus. And I'm just, I'm not, my brain hurts from
I can see how
hearing about
defeated
this.
you are.
I'm just like, and the Jackal just seems really annoying.
He is incredibly annoying.
Because
It's like,
this could have been where it all ended, you know?
mm,
Like having the whole dilemma of like, does Peter Parker, has he actually changed, with the wife and the kids? Or is he gonna do this whole Gwen Stacy thing? Or is Ben Riley gonna kill Peter Parker in this moment? Or is he gonna realize, like, I can still be my own individual? Like, this all could have ended in this issue. But they added too much, like, fluff characters and wrote this Jackal in the weirdest way that they didn't allow it to end.
well, and keep in mind, the original plan for the Clone Saga was that it was supposed to end with Amazing Spider-Man 400, which is you're going to cover in the next episode.
Yeah.
So this would have been pretty close to the end of the Clone Saga.
And it just seems like we're like this was another like weird monster of the week with two strange dudes watching overhead that have done ultimately nothing for the
Yeah.
whole series. So it's just like it's just weird. Um
I think if they would have ended the Clone Saga at issue 400, or at least closed out what they planned on with with Spider-Man 4, keep Ben around, keep Peter around, do whatever. But close out the weird mystery and the weird, like, what the fuck is going on with all these characters with issue 400. I think it would have been like an overlooked story arc, but it wouldn't have been an awful story arc. This is just
no,
kind of
like
weird.
I've been having like a fine time so far. Um like honestly, if I think I had the most fun doing Web of Life. I think that was
Mhm.
a really nice storyline, and I think that might be my favorite out of the ones I've read so far.
Well, my favorite. So, this is going to be really weird because in one of the next episodes that I am doing, there is there it's technically two stories because
Right.
there's a backup story running at the end of the comic, which is entirely separate from like the main story arc, and it has nothing to do with like moving the storyline forward. It is just literally a backup story. That is my favorite thing I have read so far. And it does matter to the Clone Saga, but it doesn't push the Clone Saga further in a plot relevant way. It just involves more character. And I think that is what was they were trying to have like very plot driven stories that kind of spun the wheels, where they should have had very character driven stories
Right.
instead. And then I would have cared so much more.
Yeah, and I think I liked Web of Life because it kind of showed the the dilemma that Ben Riley was is really going through.
Mhm.
Where anything well, I mean before that it was all setting up to really understanding. But then anything after that, like you don't see a whole lot of Betty Brant and the dynamic that he wanted to pursue. You don't you just don't see any of the actual progress except for that one like really jarring issue that I read with the Skyline restaurant.
And
Um
the homeless man that gets murdered.
and Richard.
Oh my god.
Remember his
R.I.P.
name.
Richard.
Yeah. And like I don't know, this still seems like a lot happened in what you just read. But
Mm.
it seems like nothing went forward or backward. It all just kind of stayed put.
I think so. If you were, from my perspective, it moves forward in that it introduces the Jackal to this version of the Clone Saga. You learn a lot about uh, what happens to clones. So you learn some of the stakes involved in being a clone. Because I will be very honest with you, I don't give a fuck who is the real Peter and who is not. It doesn't matter. I'm following your like particular life. Not necessarily. I don't give a shit if you were
Yeah.
like naturally born or born out of a test tube. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, because either way, like Peter Parker is married to Mary Jane and having a baby, and Ben Riley is living in a hotel and maybe has a girlfriend and like is solving crime. Like those are their lives right now.
But now we have actual like if he is a clone, he has this thing hanging over him. He will die suddenly. And it doesn't seem like there's any sort of uh way to measure how that is going, like how long it's going to take or anything like that. So
Yeah.
it is something to be fearful of.
That's fair.
That is what we're introduced to, and we're introduced to Jackal, who could at this point is the main villain behind what's going on.
Yeah, that's true.
So we have an antagonist. So it does move forward. It just doesn't really answer anything. It it just throws out suggestions.
Well, and I
Of
guess that's why
where
I
we
don't
might.
feel like it's moved a whole lot forward because we've seen a lot of villains come
Mhm.
uh and go pretty quickly. Um and I guess maybe because the Jackal has something to do with the creation of a bunch of the current characters. Like I guess that does move it forward a bit cuz now we're like meeting the maker in a way. But I guess in terms of like everybody's going to still be doing the same thing.
Yeah, that's true. And I mean,
Unless this is going to somehow spark some sort of like King Lear kind of insanity with Peter Parker. Um which it could. I mean like, so who knows? I don't know. This was just a very this was a very bizarre read.
so I have real quick, I have my what's good / what worked, which we kind of went over some of this, but I'm just gonna go over it real quick.
Woo!
Ben Riley is very quickly becoming my favorite Spider-Man for this. He's still prone to the angry outbursts and melodramatic, like,
Responses.
yeah, but he seems to consistently think of others and forms a more rational outlook than Peter has been doing in the last like 20 something issues that you and I have read.
I would
Uh,
agree. I mean like Ben Riley was like, "Hey, I'm not going to kill this guy." And Spider-Man is like punching computers.
right.
So, I
Uh,
get that.
I'm also going to say Mark Bagley's art continues to be a highlight of my readings. It's stylized in all of the ways that I love comic book art to be, and it's very dynamic and fun. I love Mark Bagley's artwork in this era. Big fan. Uh, I also think that a good thing was introducing the Guardian, as dumb as that character kind of was, but having him die from the degeneration effects. That is a great way to set up Gwen's reveal as a clone and Jack's desire to break free of his destiny, as well as showing Ben what could happen if he is the clone.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Like, there's probably a better way of doing that, but introducing a character to die is a smart move.
Yeah, and it helps develop a sense of the pattern. Cuz if it was
Right.
just Gwen Stacy and then she turns into like a puddle, then it's
Yeah.
like, "Oh, well that was just a fluke. He can
Yes.
make another one." But
Yeah.
when you have the Guardian, which is like this massive like behemoth of a Peter Parker thing, crumble and you have the Gwen Stacy like fall apart,
Mhm.
then yeah, I get that. It does kind of create a good pattern of like you should be worried. Like this is how it does actually end. It's not just a Oops.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, what didn't work in this story was a lot, but I'm also going to just say Kane's entire existence. It in this entire story arc, he exists to stand around and watch events while then also being watched by Scryer. Two things that add absolutely nothing to this story and reveal absolutely nothing about those two characters.
And Scryer's been gone for like a long time.
Yeah.
And it's starting to seem like with Kane, it's like either shit or get off the pot.
Yeah.
Tell us something more about him or just kill him off. Because he's not, he's like a crew, he's like a little quiet crew member, you know? He's moving some set pieces around, but it's like, are we supposed to know you then? Like, or are you supposed to just be kind of hiding and moving pieces around? It's really weird. And I kind of like, I like his color scheme. I like the blues and I like the purples. But like, we've had like 2 pieces of information that are very powerful from him, but then we know nothing else. And that does not balance out with the 2 powerful things.
Right.
It's like you sprayed 2 spritzes of Febreze on like a dumpster fire.
I also think the convoluted nature of the Jackal's plan and the ambiguity of whether or not he's the real Jackal or which one of Peter or Ben is a clone, that like all of that's confusing enough here. But from what I know happens later, it is way worse. And this is just like emblematic of where we are with the Clone Saga and like what is going to happen. But like specifically, if you're thinking about the Clone Saga and you're thinking about Jackal's plan in this story, even this doesn't make sense.
It's just like, what is his motive?
Why? I mean, I know he wants to fuck with Peter because he blames Peter for Gwen's death. But
is that the person? Is that the student that he loved?
Yes. And that's all introduced in the original story arc. So it's just a I hate Peter Parker thing. But like if you're thinking, so he creates a clone of Peter, either convinces that clone that he is the real Peter or convinces Peter that clone died, one way or the other, and then waits 5 years to enact this plan where he genetically modifies himself to be part Jackal or whatever, and has them meet him in the Catskills Mountains for no reason other than to lie to them. There are way more interesting ways to pull off and way more effective ways to pull off this plot.
Yeah, it's just he really is just Puck.
Yeah,
It's just Puck.
I'm never going to
Puck
not
was
see
done
that.
better in a different comic series.
And before this.
Yeah, and it's just like, and even in like Midsummer Night's Dream, like the original, or in like the Sandman issue, Puck wasn't like the biggest puzzle piece.
No, he was just annoying.
He was just a little like guy.
Yeah.
And so like to put all your eggs in the Puck basket is a bit silly. And if you're like, they just created Kane to like, it sounded like they wanted him to be the next big baddie. So why are you not properly investing time in that and putting it in Puck? I don't understand.
It makes no sense.
Yeah, it's very weird. But I'm glad that there were some good parts to it. That's always nice. It's always good to like some parts of what you're reading.
Surf the web, surf the web. I'm gonna quote from Life of Riley. which is pretty much the definitive source for any information on the Clone Saga. Editor Glenn Greenberg seems to agree with me that this story is okay on its own, but it sets a precedent for what makes the whole thing a fucking slog. He states, Smoke and Mirrors was an intriguing story and I liked most of it, but it was this story that kicked off what would become an increasingly tiresome stream of clones, lies upon lies, fake outs, and convoluted twists and turns. Bringing back the Jackal made sense to me, since we were essentially doing a sequel to the original Clone Saga and the Jackal set the whole thing in motion in the first place. Why not bring him back? And it was certainly beneficial to have him around so that he could explain the real deal about his clones. I mean, during the Evolutionary War, Jerry Conway, who wrote the original Clone Saga and created the Jackal, came back to Marvel and went to great lengths to undo his own stories from years before, now establishing that Miles Warren had not really created clones after all. By the time Jerry was done, the High Evolutionary had gotten involved and explained what Warren was really up to. It was a clone virus that turned people into genetic duplicates of other people. The whole shebang ended with the Gwen Stacy clone essentially gone from continuity, having never been a genuine clone in the first place. The Jackal remained dead, and Jerry even did a follow-up story to explain who the supervillain Carrion really was, since Carrion tied into the original Clone Saga as well. So Carrion is a character that's kind of like a zombie that was supposed to be a clone of Jackal.
Right.
Anyway, Mark Bernardo and I were really pushing the writers and editors to acknowledge and find a way around the Evolutionary War stuff, which I think is interesting that you have to have like people pushing to be like, hey, you're ignoring a huge hole in your story. But Mark and I felt that since Evolutionary War was only a few years old at this point, it would still be pretty fresh in the memories of the readers, and it couldn't just be ignored. None of the writers really wanted to deal with it because, admittedly, it was going to take a lot of time, work, and energy to figure out a way around all of it.
Mm-hmm.
It would mean undoing a story that was specifically designed to undo another story. Who wants to get bogged down with all of that continuity minutia when you've got other stuff you want to write about? But those stories were in print, and Mark and I firmly believed that they had to be addressed. It ultimately fell to Howard Mackey to address the subject of this in his chapter of Smoke and Mirrors. This was unfortunate for anyone who was looking for a satisfying explanation. With no offense intended to Howard, my observation is that he simply isn't much of a continuity person. He doesn't like to get bogged down in it. As a Spider-Man editor, as a Spider-Man writer, whenever Howard has had to address past continuity in one of his stories, his approach has been simply and grudgingly acknowledge the past event and then sweep it under the carpet as quick as possible. It happened in Smoke and Mirrors and would happen again in later stories as well. An entire annual by another writer would later have to be devoted to explaining away the Evolutionary War stuff. That is another story. The return of Scryer, with Judas Traveler nowhere to be seen, was the first sign that there was much more to this character than met the eye. Mark Bernardo had told me that J.M. DeMatteis was planning to explore the notion that Scryer was actually the real power behind Traveler, and that Traveler was so deluded and obsessed with his pursuits that even he didn't know it. Since fandom was already starting to wonder if Ben Reilly could actually be the original Peter Parker, it only made sense from a dramatic standpoint to throw the readers a curveball and raise the possibility that neither Ben nor Peter was the original, that the original has actually been tucked away in a pod for all of these years. That would certainly be a tantalizing notion, wouldn't it? And it was this spirit in which Smoke and Mirrors was produced. And I would say that's a fucking shitty premise.
If they just kept the whole evolution thing. Evolutionary.
The virus thing?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like, what if they just made that Ben Reilly's thing, trying to figure out who he once was? Because if it was
I like that idea too.
If it was supposed to be a person who then turned into another person, like, that would have been so, like, I mean, yeah, it's interesting to be like, oh, I'm a clone. Okay, well, who am I as an individual? Like, that is still interesting. But, like, I'm wondering just, like, if it should have just been called the Evolutionary Saga. And they wouldn't have to deal with that whole issue of trying to, like, erase it or change it. Like if it was just okay, well like Peter Parker is Peter Parker and he's still dealing with like I'm just the spider, but now I'm going to be a dad, so now I got to focus on trying to be a dad and like bettering myself. While Ben Riley is like, okay, well like I have the abilities now of the spider and I have the physique and the face and some memories of the spider. But like, what if I use all those powers and responsibilities and all that stuff to maybe try and figure out who I was and maybe try and get back to that? Like, that could have been so good.
Yeah. I think an interesting thing is at the end of every episode, you and I are kind of like
What if we
fixing.
rewrote the Clone Saga?
Yeah, like there are, I think, way more interesting stories to go down, and it feels like they really just kind of they kind of wanted to do the interesting story, but it seemed like they were stuck in this rut of doing episodic, uh, like villain of the week, like very, which again, I like breezy stories, and it
Yeah,
seemed
like
like they were.
one of my favorite ones is a breezy story. Like, I don't mind it.
Mhm.
But I think I didn't mind it because they took time and had a split between like, yeah, villain of the week, but also like, you know, so and so's getting asked to go to lunch. Isn't that nice? Like you can have both in
I
a
think that
in
I
an
think that
issue.
the mix that they went with is jarring because you're not really getting one or the other. You're getting kind of half of both.
Yes.
And
It's weird.
it's really weird. uh
I think they overcomplicated things for themselves, unfortunately. And I mean like what they were doing with like the things that they were told that they have to do.
mhm.
Like I know I'm not a writer. Like so yeah, like props to you. But I just wish they saw what else they could do aside from clones. Like okay, you made a thing. Well, how can you how can you move from that thing now aside from erasing it? Like it's kind of like a dance. Like you have to move from one body movement to another. You can't be in a split and then in four counts be on your head. Like there has to be some sort of movement with your body in order to get on your head. So like I I just don't like they just I feel like they wanted to be in a split and then end up on their head in one count. Does that make sense?
yeah.
Does
y- I mainly I think I followed you. I think that
I think they tried to they tried to get there too quick or be too choppy. And like stories and art and everything, like you have to have a fluid motion and like I wish they just kind of used it as a creative challenge to take the virus and put
yeah.
that as part of their like big event thing because they could have. I mean, we just thought of it after reading or thinking of like 8 different issues or whatever. Like, so I don't know.
I think that
I'm also doing this out of leisure. I'm not like a paid person who has to have things at a deadline. And this
yeah,
was
no,
also like in the
that was
90s.
kind of the next thing I was going to mention is I'm actually kind of feeling a bit bad for the creatives that were involved in this because if you think about it, there's editorial mandates, there are like changing leadership behind the scenes, and you're having to tell like a quarter of a story that makes sense with like three other people's stories,
Yeah, and you don't know what issue you're going to work on, let
and
alone which
it's
story section you're going to work on.
so
So
I'm
that
imagining they're given a an outline to kind of fill in. And I think that's part of why we get so many spinning wheels because they don't know Like they don't want to move things too much because then you're going to fuck it up for the next person.
There's too many darlings in this project.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I didn't know that this was going to be my phrase of the day, but this is the phrase of the day. Just all around. And like, I love creatives and I want them all to have jobs, but like, man, you should have put some of these people on different jobs and they should have just had a smaller crew working on this whole thing.
Yeah, you would be hard pressed to convince Marvel to cut back at this time because they were just printing so much. But I think what would have really helped is pare this down to maybe 2 comics instead of 4, and give much more creative freedom to the people that are actually writing it. Make editorial, sit back, step in when you need to, but like don't keep mandating that it lasts longer or it ends at a specific time. Let the story dictate where it ends.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it would be so much better. And then it also probably would have made several stories rather than one big one, you know?
Right.
Anyway, that's where we are.
What a time.
This was 3 issues that took us longer to get through than most. But I mean, we got through it, and
we did it.
We're set up for a new story arc that you're going to be going through next time.
Yes.
And hopefully it makes sense and we can build off of that. I mean, this one, it's not like you have to know a lot of details. Jackal's back and he keeps fucking lying about everything. So there you go.
Yeah, like you catch on pretty quick.
Yeah. So you can find more information at comicallypedantic.com. You can also follow us on Instagram by searching @pedanticcast. New episodes come out most Sundays on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and at comicallypedantic.com. I don't really mention it that often, but I do have like a TikTok and a YouTube set up for this.
Oh.
Just like dumb stuff that gets put out there. But I don't like they're just really there for short bits of content. Or I post our episodes on YouTube. So you can follow us there if you want.
And we have the Instagram. I don't know if we said that. It's been a long recording.
It is. Our brains are broken.
Whoop.
If you have any comments or questions, you can send them in text or audio recording to comicallypedantic@gmail.com. Please indicate if you'd like your name or question read on the air. And don't forget, we still own fuckcomicsgate.com if you'd like to send a donation to the Games and Online Harassment Hotline. We will be back soon with another deep dive into the world of comics, but until then, you can find more exciting adventures at your local comic shop.
Bye! Anyway, welcome to Comically Pedantic, where we talk about movies. No, we don't. That's the Weekly Planet intro. I like that I know the Weekly Planet intro more than I know our own. Good times. I could do the book cheat one. Hi, welcome to Book Cheat, where I read the book so you don't have to.
Okay.
What a time.